Hi, this is Selin Kurnaz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Massive Bio. Today, I'm going to talk about disrupting oncology clinical trials enrollment with AI and services. And I take this opportunity to thank for the conference to invite for me for this session. So, in terms of my background, as I have mentioned, this is Selin Kurnaz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Massive Bio. I come from a very heavy engineering background. And after that, for about 10 years, I was in strategy, operations, and transactions, one of the co-founders of Ernst & Young and private equity value creation. And Massive Bio has been founded based on my family's frustration in cancer care, because at that point in time, my uncle has been diagnosed with cancer, and that was a very devastating experience for me and for my family, because that was the first time that a cancer has been experienced in the family. I was not necessarily planning to open up a new company in cancer, but I have recognized that this is not something that we can do as a side project. So I basically left my career, every kind of an aspiration that I have in the world of transaction advisor services or investment management, and take this step to this side in order to be able to found Massive Bio. And at that point in time, I have also partnered with a medical oncologist, Dr. Arturo Bonilla, and a product and technologist, Chagtai Chuljolo, in order to be able to establish the company. I was actually talking in another event about 2 weeks ago, and one thing that I was mentioning, that there is one thing that's actually non-negotiable if you're establishing a new company, which is the strength and the power of the co-founder set. And that's kind of what we are very proud at Massive Bio, to consolidate the commercial, clinical, and the technology expertise in order to change the unfortunate nature of oncology clinical trial enrollment. So at the front and center, Massive Bio is a company that is consolidating the technology, the services, and oncology at the same time. One thing that's not negotiable at Massive Bio is our dedicated focus on oncology. When we say oncology, it includes the oncology, hematology, and in certain aspects of the rare diseases. In addition to that, we are providing an AI-based technology, data, services, and access, which I'm going to explain in a minute about how we do it, why we do it, and what is the value add for this for cancer patients, the pharmaceutical companies, payers, and providers. So I don't want to quote unquote preach to the choir, but like everyone knows that the clinical trial enrollment is the most critical rate limiting factor in drug discovery. So kind of talking about a couple of the metrics, it takes about 10 to 15 years to develop a drug. It takes about 2.5 to 2.7 million cost per drug. And if you look at the IQVIA's report, there's about 500 phase 1 regulatory submission in solid tumors in precision medicine. And there's an increasing complexity in how the clinical trials has been done because of the requirements to have next generation sequencing testing. A lot of the trials need more time to meet their enrollment goals. There's a very small amount of patients that's been offered to have a clinical trial. And also based on the patients that we have onboarded, we have seen that it's not enough if you identify the patient. It's not enough that the patient is clinically eligible. 75% of the eligible patients fail to enroll due to operational obstacles, which is about the referral to a site, the financial considerations, and logistical obstacles. And Massive Bio is increasing the clinical trial success rate, optimizing the trial cost, and accelerating drug commercialization. So while we talk about the barriers to clinical trials, it's also important to understand the massive opportunity and a constantly growing market, because one of the reasons why we have selected oncology in addition to supporting cancer patient. It's the strength and the size of the markets. Because if you look at all clinical trials, there is about more than 50% of the clinical trials are in the world of oncology, and there is more than 10% year-over growth. It's not just a large market, it is also a accelerated growth market. So when those things are combining, that creates a business opportunity in addition to the social opportunity that it generates. There is, more than $18 million cancer patients diagnosed. There is more than 1,100 new clinical trials in oncology. Unfortunately, the clinical trial enrollment rate is very low, 3%. In certain instances, it's 8%. But when you look at, some of the other, reports, that's actually more focusing on clinical trial enrollment rate for biomarker-based testing or targeted treatment is about like 0.01%. Then if you think about the price for enrollment, the enrollment service revenue is about $12 billion. And with a 10% year-over growth, it becomes within 5 years an $18 billion market. And also, this is a quote-unquote a market that everyone sees. But if you want to be a market leader, the idea is not to just take a piece from the quote unquote the market. It's also to create new markets, which we anticipate that in addition to these $18 billion market that is expected to be in 5 years, there is also another $13 billion market that you can add as a quote unquote a business size. And Massive Bio is the only oncology dedicated tech enabled patient recruitment company with a global expertise that is working on this market and creating new markets. So I wanted to quote unquote take a step back in here. We are a company, not only focusing on quote unquote clinical trials. The precise thing that we are trying to do is that we're trying to develop a two-sided network. One side of that network are cancer patients. The other side of that network are the payers, pharmaceutical companies, specialty pharmacies, and providers. So when you develop that two-sided network, one side patients, the other side are the enterprises, there are different use cases transpires. The first use case for that, it's the fixing the clinical trial enrollment, which we are working on becoming that global oncology patient enrollment powerhouse, which is about the $12 billion market right now. In 5 years, it's going to become an $18 billion market, which is a business that we're active at this point in time. The other business that we're currently working in a stealth mode is fixing the drug selection. There was a report that we have been reviewing previous weekend with my co-founder while we were preparing for the speech for the HLTH, is that there is about 30% wrong allocation of drugs for the patients that has been tested with NGS. So we are actually talking about the undergenotyping, the importance, but also the challenges of genotyping patients. But at the same time, even the patients has been genotyped for the particular biomarkers or a comprehensive tumor profiling, 30% of the time, those patients are not getting actually the right drugs. So that's in another area that Massive Bio is starting to work on, how we can fix the drug selection and how we can help those treating oncologists to select the right drugs, which is in turn about another about the $10 to $20 billion market, which we're working on deployment for 12 to 18 months. When you go into a clinical trial enrollment, then when you're going into fixing the drug selection, the next stage is development of the effective drugs faster. We know that the oncology drug development industry is about $160 billion, and it's expected to be at $300 billion in 2030. So Massive Bio is also becoming I would say, has motivations and aspirations to bring the knowledge that we accumulate from the data, the technology, and the monitoring of those patients over time to further enhance and enrich the drug development process in oncology clinical trial enrollment. So what I wanted to, I think, lay out the foundation in here. Yes, Massive Bio is a company very passionate about fixing the clinical trial enrollment, but at the same time, fixing the clinical trial enrollment, it's a one stage in a 3-stage journey, because we believe that there is even more to do while you create that marketplace between the patients as well as the enterprises in order to be able to create efficiency in the healthcare systems globally. So let's take a step back in terms of the first stage. What is happening in the clinical trial enrollment value chain? So let's first kind of discuss about what a clinical trial enrollment value chain is. The clinical trial enrollment value chain constitutes of 3 stages. The first stage, it's the patient identification. The second stage is prescreening. And then the last stage is patient referral and concierge enrollment enablement. On the first stage, which is we call as the patient identification, what are some of the issues that the industry has been facing for? The quality of the data is very low. What that means is the following. The data is very disparate. The data is very incomplete. The data is very non-real time. When there is no universal, quote unquote, a global real-time patient registry that you go to after all this money has been spent, and you can identify a particular patient with a particular tumor type or a particular biomarker and say that in this institution with this physician, this is precisely the type of patient that you can find in Poland. That's that kind of that level of the high quality data that doesn't happen at the nationwide or at the global wide, no matter where we go. And that is a significant amount of issue, because I imagine a world where when a cancer patient has been diagnosed with cancer, at that moment in time that there is an intervention and a cancer patient has been prescreened for a clinical trial. That's kind of because we are not only trying to kind of match patients to clinical trials, but we are also trying to move this thing as early in the process so that the patients get opportunity to get access to those clinical trials at the very beginning, as opposed to they're thinking about these clinical trials, something that's after the fact, everything has sailed for their, I would say, treatment. And then the second thing is the stage of prescreening. And in the prescreening, one of the major issues is that this is a disorganized process. This is very manual, and this is very non-scalable. So we win an RFP from the National Cancer Institute, and we have worked on the prescreening process for Columbia University. And when we were working there, what was clear is that in order to prescreen one patient to a clinical trial manually, it takes about 25 minutes. And they have 10,000 patients and 334 clinical trials. If you make that math, 25 minutes, 10,000 patients for 334 clinical trials, that takes weeks, if not months, in order to be able to prescreen those patients. And it's a very manual process. So that is one of the other areas why the clinical trial enrollment is at the crossroads, and it's been completely kind of stuck to this manual process. And then lastly, even if you identify the patient, even if you prescreen the patient, there is the whole aspect, the kind of the big gorilla in the room, which is the last mile. You have to resolve the site coordination issues. Even in the United States, 85% of the oncology care is handled by community-based practices. Those are the non-NCI designated cancer centers. And when those things are handled at the community-based practices, the amount of clinical research capabilities are limited, which means that the patient needs to be referred to a location where there is more establishment and infrastructure for clinical trial enrollment. So that referral is a process by itself. It's a work by itself where a lot of the patient, I would say more than 75% of the patients, are challenged in order to be able to make that move from where they're currently treated versus where they need to enroll for a trial. In addition to that, there is for example, the logistical issues. If you're talking about the patient that is a receptionist and if they cannot come to a particular site prior to, I would say 6 p.m. or after 5 p.m., you have to manage that all of those things are going to be able to manage. The other aspect, it's the insurance issue, the financial issue. If the patient doesn't have the insurance, then how that patient is going to be able to cover it for some of the expenses that may not necessarily be a part of the clinical trial budget. And that's a significant concern. If you think about why the patients are not enrolling into a clinical trial, this is one of for example, the third, if not the first issue that the patients are experiencing to participate into a clinical trial or hesitate to participate into a clinical trial. So in addition to all this, there are two other issues that is important in the clinical trial enrollment value chain. I have briefly touched the importance of I would say the targeted treatments, but the targeted treatments, in other words, these biomarker-based treatments comes with a tax. And the tax is that you have to sequence those patients for the biomarker discovery. It can be either a small panel or it can be a large panel, which we call as a comprehensive tumor profiling. And when you look at the situation in the United States, as I was mentioning, 85% of those patients are treated at the community-based practices. And we have yet to see a very well articulated workflow for next generation sequencing testing, which means that there is a significant under genotyping. So if there is no genotyping, I think it's a visual thinking to be able to enroll these patients to these targeted treatment-based clinical trials. And on top of that, there is the whole notion of lack of diversity, contributing to diverse patient population become very fashionable in the last couple of years. However, one of the very primary reasons that we founded Massive Bio about 7 years ago is precisely to give access to patients that are treated in these non-academic medical cancer center, where there is kind of I would say a more diverse patient population, and especially for the new regulations that's in the United States, that's not a nice to have anymore. It's a must have at that point in time. And you will be surprised how many requests that I'm receiving every single day in order to be able to provide that diversity. But when you kind of add all these factors in the patient identification, the prescreening, patient referral, and concierge enrollment enablement, and when you kind of spice it up with all these under-genotyping problems and lack of diversity problems, that's where you reach I would say, the perfect storm in clinical trial enrollment value chain. And that's why it's broken. And that's why we're working, night and day. And frankly, right now it's like 3:40 a.m. in the morning because I'm kind of joining the discussion from New York City. And the reason why we're so passionate about that 3:40 a.m. Is that because of a lot of the challenges, but a lot of challenges brings also the lot of the opportunities. So how we're approaching to this, we are talking about the identification, prescreening, and concierge enrollment enablement. On the patient identification side, we are trying to look at this thing at least in two perspectives. The first perspective is that you have to identify those patients from every single place. It can be either identified directly or indirectly. When you say a patient identification directly, those are the patients that has been acquired through a patient contact center. And those patients are coming to those patient contact center either from other call centers, from patient advocacy group, from digital engagement, from a mobile application, from webinars, a lot of other brand awareness tools. And then they come to that patient contact center. They're consented for their medical records or their next generation sequencing testing to be, I would say, evaluated. And if they are not sequenced, then we work with them and with their treating oncologists for them to be able to get access to next generation sequencing testing. And then after that, there's a prescreening and a last mile enrollment. So, but that is still the kind of the direct to patient acquisition. And then there is a whole aspect of indirect patient acquisition, which is the enrichment of patient acquisition channel through going to the providers and identifying some of the physicians and the hospitals around the sponsor sites and identifying which physicians are potentially going to be able to refer their patients to those sponsor sites, or identifying the physicians through a payer prior authorization unit, or identifying those physicians or patients through a specialty pharmacy, or identifying physicians that has the patient based on a particular biomarker through a referral from a next generation sequencing company. And all of these have to happen in these multi-channel mode. And not only that it has to happen in that multi-channel mode, it also has to happen real time. And that's the aspect of patient identification. So after you go into patient identification, after you go into medical record collection and the next generation sequencing testing results collection, again, if there's no next generation sequencing testing results, then you go there, quote unquote, helping the patient as well as the treating oncologist to get tested. Then there is the whole notion of structuring that medical records and GS information as well as the inclusion exclusion criteria, so that the matching component or the pre-screening component that happens at a granular level, and you're doing this thing for 13 to 14,000 actively recruiting oncology clinical trials. The level of the scale is humongous. And then lastly is it, again, the last mile part, the holy grail of this, how you're going to be able to eliminate the friction and the operational challenges on the referral, the finances, making sure that the provider is fully, educated about the importance of this clinical trial for their patient, and resolving that multi-stakeholder operational complexities in order to activate the clinical trial enrollment event when there is the relevant clinical trial that has been provided to the cancer patient. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to make sure that every cancer patient can start activation of clinical trial enrollment while they are at their living room. Because the moment that you basically go and work in the healthcare environment to tell the patient, oh, go this side, go that side, and then the patient goes to that side 65% of the time, they understand that there is no clinical trial that they're eligible for that particular side, after spending days, if not months, to kind of schedule a pre-screening visit at the site. And that is an incredibly inefficient system for any cancer patient to get access to clinical trials, although thousands of these clinical trials are currently readily available for them, actively looking for patients. So there is that significant mismatch between demand and supply, and resolving that bottlenecks is where we spend our entire days, nights, minutes, and seconds. And then if you think about this, this is not just a kind of a service problem and a quality problem. This is also a lot of a technology problem as well. There is a significant amount of data that has been used in terms of where to target the patients, how to target the patients, and then after you target the patients, then how to prescreen those patients, and then development of certain competencies, from data-driven feasibility to real-time patient identification to AI-based prescreening, concierge enrollment to just-in-time site activation, then going into the kind of minutia of I think what kind of products and services from a clinical trial enrollment that the patients, the physicians, the pharmaceutical companies, and all other enterprises would use. But at the front and center, the type of input that we have, it's the clinical information, it's the genomic information, it's the protocol level of inclusion exclusion criteria, and then there is all other sets of information that we use in the context of patient identification. So in addition to using our data, because in the world of oncology, you need to have a significantly large top of the funnel, which means that you have to bring all patient acquisition channels to its senses. And at the end of the day, we are a young company. We are a startup. We are trying to pull all these different data sets in order to be able to identify those patients. But at the same time, we are actually working with our sponsors because, sponsors are spending millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in order to be able to really have an ability to be able to have real-time patient identification. And now what is starting to happen is that they purchase data, they try to mine the data, we purchase data, we also try to mine data so that we're consolidating their efforts and our efforts, and then we sit at the intersection to become that Datavant in oncology and clinical trials and do that master prescreening and become that master prescreening hub. Of course, when we are doing this real-time patient identification, we are targeting based on inclusion of the diversity metrics, the socioeconomic conditions of the patient, then going into deep prescreening, the medical records and genomic testing collection, again, working on the workflow if the patient does not have next generation sequencing testing. And after that deep prescreening, referring to concierge services and referral to site enrollment. So the other thing that I wanted to discuss about this presentation is that, we're talking about AI. So, where is this AI? So let's kind of discuss what are some of the kind of the drivers of AI that's being used in the process. But keep in mind that AI is a tool, but AI without services and operationalization and localization, especially if you're trying to work on this thing at a global scale, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get a benefit from that AI. So in order to get benefit from the AI, you have to make sure that you're optimizing how AI has been used from a technical standpoint, but at the same time, how that AI has been operationalized and localized through the right use of the services. So there are three ways, again. In terms of the patient identification, there are two ways that we are using the AI, which is basically how we're going to target those patient populations so that we're going to be able to get real-time access. And that targeting is based on prevalence information. It can be based on a biomarker status information. It can be based on some of the sites that the competitors have used, and then you wanted to capitalize on those sites after they close those sites because you wanted to bring a trial and that there's a particular patient population that has already been used. You basically target based on the distance. You base the target based on the diversity and some of the socioeconomic conditions. So those are some of the ways at which that you look at some of those prevalence information and you use artificial intelligence to mine the data that gets you to those criteria that you're looking at. The other aspect is that, for example, we have formed a partnership where, as I have mentioned, that it's so difficult in order to be able to provide or develop that workflow for next generation sequencing testing, especially for those patients that's treated in the non-academic medical cancer center. And then we are basically partnering for this institution in order to be able to identify which patients actually need to be tested because they are applying an artificial intelligence to the pathologist slide to understand which biomarkers has the potential to present in that patient. And if they believe that there's a certain type of biomarkers that present in the patient, then at that point in time, we drop everything to make sure that there's a next generation sequencing happens, as opposed to being completely blind and trying to kind of force fit the NGS sequencing to the workflow that doesn't exist. And that's a very novel way of integrating, the digital pathology with the clinical trial enrollment, which hasn't been done before the massive bias intervention on that. The other area is on the prescreening side. On the prescreening side, there are two things that's happening. One of them is the structuring of the medical records, the genomic testing results, as well as the inclusion-exclusion criteria. You get the inclusion-exclusion criteria at least from two places, from the protocols and or the clinicaltrials.gov, and then structuring that unstructured information and extracting the parameters that's relevant for prescreening the patients for trials. And then after the structuring has been done with natural language processing, then working on the matching, increasing or improving the sensitivity and specificity of the matching with the clinical and genomic information of the patient versus the inclusion-exclusion criteria that you have. And then lastly, which is probably the area that, that's still a question mark in the industry about how the artificial intelligence can be used, which I believe that this is also an area where the artificial intelligence can be very profoundly used. One area, it's the operational decision support and creating that clinical decision support by the application of AI using different patient personas. Because, when you onboard thousands or hundreds of thousands of patients, you start to experience some personas about those patients. Do they have the insurance? Are they in state, out of state? When this thing happens, what will be the next stages that needs to happen? And those decision making should be I would say automated and scaled in order to be able to reduce the amount of human intervention and human time, and I would say the cost that's associated with those humans for these last mile to service to the cancer patient. In addition to that, it's very important to be able to monitor and collect outcomes from these patients, both in the sense that what does this clinical trial is bringing them from a clinical standpoint. Is there any improvement in their process? Is there any degradation in their process? As well as, what are the type of the drugs that has been used, and what are some of the things that would help them in their next stage of their care. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of analytics and insights that can be generated from those patient population, either understanding the drug utilization, understanding the testing utilization, and then what's the outcomes, even also looking at some of the kind of the side effects and even the motivation of the patient. Does the patient want to continue enrollment to a clinical trial? Why the patient, I would say, doesn't want it to continue being a part of clinical trial? Because there are certain, I think, clinical trials where the dosing, especially in the first couple of months, is very intense, so that the patients may or may not, I think, prefer to get to that level of intense dosing requirements in their journey. So those are all the things that can certainly be analyzed, and insights can be generated in order to make the patients comfortable about the process, as well as working with pharma how better designs can be generated. So the other aspect that I wanted to mention in here is the importance of global footprint in order to serve to global customers. Because I sit right now in New York City. We are a company that has been founded in the United States, and there is no question to kind of deny the importance of the value of the market in the United States. But at the same time, until we have a global footprint and global evaluation of those patients to every clinical trial around the world, it's still a very, suboptimal solution. because of that reason, we spend significant amount of time outside the United States in order to make sure that, we understand, every site, in order to make sure that we understand what the patient, acquisition patterns are, what the data that's available in order for us to be able to identify more patients, what is the referral patterns, because even every country has their own, referral pattern requirements. They have their own data protection requirements. Those are all the things that we're working on. Currently, we are about 87 people in the company operating in 12 markets. We have acquired 26 customer, 18 pharma, 5 CRO, and 3 provider systems, including the National Cancer Institute, in the last 24 months. The number of sites that we support is about 1,750. 2/3 of those sites are in the United States. 1/3 of those sites are in outside US, including, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, Romania, Greece, Turkey, Israel, and Brazil. And the number of patients that we have onboarded is more than 100,000. And about 55% of those patients has been onboarded in the United States, and then the 45% is acquired in the outside United States. And what we believe in 12 months, the mix is going to be 25% US, 70% outside United States. And we also, I put a goal to the company to hit 100,000 patients, in later part of 2023. We're there in that goal 9 months early. And the next goal that we set for the company is to reach about 250,000 patients in mid-2024. We are very, very aggressive in order to be able to get to that expansion to a fairly large patient volumes in order to be able to really create and show the impact. So there are other areas in terms of, like how we're defining the performance. What are some of the areas that we are focusing on? And if you think about that, there are predominantly 3 areas: the prescreening time, end-to-end enrollment duration, and the clinical trial enrollment rate. So in terms of the prescreening time, as I have mentioned before, it takes about 25 minutes for one trial for one patient. And it's almost technically impossible to prescreen those patients to all actively recruiting clinical trials at clinicaltrials.gov, which varies between 13 to 14,000, depending upon which data you look at it. And trying to do that manually, it's a non-solvable equation. So we are trying to do that by the leverage of technology in 6 to 7 seconds. I'm not talking about order of magnitude of tens. I'm talking about an order of magnitude of thousands in here. So, and then the other thing, it's the end-to-end enrollment duration, because it's not just about like finding those patients, how fast you're, bringing that clinical trial to the patient. When I started this business, and when we were talking about, okay, how much time that it is going to take to enroll this patient, sometimes people were looking at me with like blank eyes. There was not even a clear metric and even an understanding how long it's going to take place. But now what we are trying to do is that we are trying to identify the patient, take the consent, collect the medical records, prescreen that, and enroll that patient in 72 hours, especially for those patients, for example, that are working with issues on the pancreatic cancer that are very, very rapidly, I would say, moving diseases. That's very important. And also keep in mind that we're not talking about patients that are at the particular institution. We're talking about any patient that can be in the United States and outside US, and finding those patients, prescreen them to any trials, and making sure that the operational issues has been fulfilled, and then enroll them. And then the other aspect, it's the clinical trial enrollment rate. I know that everyone has their own way of calculating that rate based on what the denominator is, but in the order of magnitude, the industrial rate is about 3%. And then we are trying to bring that to 12.5%, changing the patient identification, changing the prescreening and automating it and scaling it. And then, of course, resolving the biggest gorilla, which is the last mile, to making sure that the financial, operational, and logistical issues has been resolved that prevents the patient to enroll into clinical trials. So the other aspect of this is about, how this kind of traditional patient recruitment industry works and how massive bio is disrupting this industry. So the traditional patient recruitment industry works, first of all, they want it to be a solution for everyone, for everything. There's no oncology dedicated, I would say, solution. The other thing is that there's a lot of great marketing agencies that does, Facebook related advertisement, do a digital prescreening, and then automated, I think, referral to the sites, which is interesting, but that can only work in acne, but that does not work in oncology. So there are at least 3 different things that we are trying to bring the market that the market has not seen before. One of them is that our intense focus in oncology, because the prescreening is different, the network is different, the last mile is different, everything is different in oncology. So when you're trying to do that, you need to be incredibly focused, and that's how you become a category-making company. The second thing is that, as I was kind of talking about...
If you can hear me, you need to be wrapping up if at all possible.
Sure. I'll be wrapping up.
Thank you. Super.
The second area is about, not just kind of thinking about, quote unquote, the clinical trial, enrollment. It's actually thinking through beyond that, talking about the drug matching side, the real world data side, really trying to institutionalize that marketplace between the patients and all the other enterprises, because we're not just kind of trying to unlock the power of the clinical trial enrollment space. We're actually trying to unlock almost everything that is preventing that cancer patient to get the best access to their care. And then lastly, this patient enrollment value chain, the industry is more kind of understanding about the importance of the workflow, but that's actually a value chain. And in that value chain, you have to be able to cover every aspect of the patient identification, the prescreening, and the concierge enrollment with excruciating detail. And that's where I would say we are focused on, and we are trying to change the industry in that setting. So there is a lot of value proposition to pharma. By that way, the pharma becomes real-time prescreening for enrollment. There's a significant amount of funnel transparency. There's optimal trial cost and speed. And there is also a hybrid and global patient acquisition that brings the value proposition to pharma, because at the end of the day, we wanted to find those patients faster. While we are trying to find those patients faster, we wanted to make sure that we are doing this thing in the most cost and operational effective way so that they have more time to kind of bring more drugs to the market. And in terms of the value proposition, we are kind of talking about, or we have been talking about, the value proposition to the patient and pharma, but at the same time, this is not just the patient and pharma value proposition. There is a significant amount of value proposition, for example, to a payer, in order to be able to reduce the cost from drugs and reduce the variability, especially for those advanced stage cancer patients that are treated in the non-academic medicine area, and as well as on the provider side.
Selin. Hello, Selin. You have a last few minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
Do you have more slides to go?
No, I have only one slide left.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And then on the provider side, because, that as the physicians, as all of us knows, that they're incredibly busy. And when they are incredibly busy, they do not have the time to prescreen those patients, especially for manually for all of these clinical trials that's actively recruiting around the globe. And these kind of innovations are reducing the clinical staff time and receiving patients from the non-catchment areas so that they become a universe for those referrals, and ability to adapt innovative site activation techniques to gain visibility and access to pharma if they are not necessarily in the circle of the CROs. And lastly, I have been talking about a lot of these kind of issues, challenges, setbacks, and all that stuff. This is the clinical trial enrollment in oncology is not something that can be solved by one company, one institution, and one of something. Even you are the one of the most well-established institution like NCI, the American Cancer Society. So that requires a collaboration and working together. And because of that reason, we have been working with NCI. We have been working with some of the subunits of American Cancer Society. We have been also doing, private partnerships from the kind of application of AI, patient acquisition, and so on and so forth. And what we are saying to the world or the oncology clinical trial enrollment world is that come and join us so that let's work on this problem together. We understand that, the task is very big, but we also believe that by public and private collaboration, we can create a dent in this universe and create access to a significantly large number of cancer patients. And hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions online and offline and collaborate with them colleagues in the near future. And thank you very much for your time and the opportunity.
Thank you, Selin. That was an excellent presentation.